Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Branch 458 podcast. I'm Casey Ritchie. This week, we're going to try something new. I have a leadership project from Class 30. Sister Marta Witten from Branch 143 in Ohio put together this project over the legislative events that the NALC had to push through to earn collective bargaining to get that. And there's even some interviews in here from strikers from 1970 when we went on strike. So if you are able, there is a video along with it. You can listen as she gives this presentation. But if you are able to go back, or if you're able to listen to this on YouTube, or some way that you can watch the video as it goes through this presentation, it's definitely worth it. So thank you, Marta, for sending this to me, and I appreciate everything you did to put this together.
William H. Wood was the first NALC president in 1889, and the first meeting was held in the Schaefer's Saloon in Milwaukee on August 29, 1889. In 1888, a bill passed that limited the workday to 8 hours a day. The Post Office Department openly ignored it for months and made carriers, specifically union officials, carry mail 8 hours on, 8 hours off, and 8 hours on in a 24-hour time period. In 1893, the NALC sued the Post Office Department and won a $3.5 million settlement in overtime claims. This was the first successful battle against the Post Office Department. Following the lawsuit, the Post Office Department hired hundreds of men for President Grover Cleveland to spy on carriers and report violations. If charges were sustained, the postmaster could fire the carrier without any repercussions and then hire a new carrier of the right political party based off of who the president was. Examples of violations range from stopping to answer a question or simply having a conversation with a customer, to a carrier saving a small child and mother from a gas leak in their house. Carriers were informed months later of their violations and expected to explain themselves to postal officials. The spotter system affected morale. You'll see here a telegram from the Superior, Wisconsin in 1895. In March of 1896, the spotter system was officially disbanded by Congress, denying the Post Office Department funds for spies. By 1900, there had been no wage increases for 13 years. Bricklayers were making $4 a day, carpenters made $2.80 a day, and letter carriers were making $2.21 a day. In 1912, the Lloyd-La Follette Act passed, outlawing the gag order and giving government workers the right to petition and lobby Congress. The only bad thing is it forbade postal employees from affiliating with any outside organization and to not engage in any strike. There were also two other bills passed that year: the Riley 8-10 Act, which states that the postal employees not spread an 8-hour shift over more than 10 consecutive hours, and the Mann Sunday Closing Act, which states that post offices will be closed on Sunday, assuring the workers a day of rest. Woodrow Wilson appointed Albert S. Burleson as Postmaster General. Burleson is one of the most anti-union postmasters general in history. He tried to repeal all three laws passed in 1912. He refused leave without pay to officers, which forced the NALC president to resign from the post office to continue to carry out union duties. And he also refused to meet with the NALC. Congress voted a 10% pay increase for all federal employees in 1917, and Burleson succeeded in excluding postal employees from that pay increase. The NALC jumped into action and took the issues to Capitol Hill. The first successful front was Congress enacting a bill making salary distinction illegal, which ensured that carriers who collected mail make the same amount as those that delivered it. The second successful front was the NALC obtaining passage to the first Federal Employee Compensation Act. And despite Burleson being very adamant in opposing retirement benefits and a pension to letter carriers, the NALC, alongside the AFL, secured the Civil Service Retirement Act, which ensured that all letter carriers received retirement benefits. A salary campaign opened at the convention in 1923. 1920 was the last pay increase, and the current salary was sitting at $1,800 a year. Campaigns were presented to the Board of Commerce representatives and senators of $2,400 or bust. Members of Congress got annoyed by the overwhelming amount of letters supporting the wage increase, and in June of 1924, a bill passed increasing wages by $300. Despite the widespread support, President Coolidge vetoed it on the same day that Congress adjourned for fall elections, making it impossible to override the president's actions. The NALC did not give up, and on February 28, 1925, after intensive lobbying, the NALC won the fight, and Coolidge reluctantly signed the bill, increasing salary by $300 a year. On October 29, 1929, the stock market crashed, unemploying 13 million people. Before the Depression, the average salary of a letter carrier was mediocre, and now the salary was enviable. Hoover's Economy Act of 1932 authorized the first wage reduction in history of an 8.33% decrease. Roosevelt took office on March 20, 1933, and he cut salaries another 15%, making wages what they were in 1916. NALC President Gaynor and the National Secretary, Michael Finnan, lobbied continuously for wages to be restored. And in 1934, the NALC presented impressive documentation that carriers' wages were inadequate before the reductions. And the NALC finally won the fight in 1935, completely restoring the wages. In April of 1941, William Dougherty was elected NALC president, and letter carriers were 16 years without a wage increase. During that convention, Dougherty and the rest of the NALC were going to start pushing for a $900 pay increase, but before he could initiate it, Pearl Harbor was attacked on December 7, 1941. 15,000 letter carriers joined the armed forces, and the remainder worked long and hard hours. From 1942 to 1949, the NALC was successful in getting a $300 temporary war bonus, permanent pay increases raising the salary to $2,500 a year, another $400 pay increase, and 10 important pieces of legislation, including 2 more pay increases. In October of 1949, a law passed abolishing village delivery service, which gave all letter carriers the same wages for the first time since 1863. The only downside was the NALC was still prohibited from collective bargaining and denied the power to strike by its employer, the United States government. From 1952 to 1960, President Eisenhower vetoed 4 bills for a pay raise for postal workers. The only successful pay bill to pass was the Postal Field Service Compensation Act of 1955. Letter carriers were making an average of $4,400 a year, which was $1,120 less than the average American family. By 1960, letter carriers were working multiple jobs to support their families. And in June of 1960, another postal pay bill was vetoed by Eisenhower, but Congress overwhelmingly overrode the veto, and we were victorious. In 1961, John F. Kennedy heard the relentless campaign for union recognition and passed the Rhodes-Johnston Bill, which provided recognition and collective bargaining for the NALC. And then in January of 1962, Kennedy signed Executive Order 10988, and the order replaced the Lloyd-LaFollette Act of 1912. The order established an employee management cooperation program, which officially recognized the legitimate role of unions, and the union was then able to represent employees in grievance discussions and negotiate a national contract. Jerome J. Keating led negotiations, and after 5 months of negotiating, signed the first national agreement in March of 1963. In 1962, the Comparability Act passed, which guaranteed that all wages of all postal and federal workers would keep pace with the rising salaries of workers in the private industry. In 1965, the Vietnam War had begun and threatened inflation rising significantly. The Union was confident in President Lyndon B. Johnson backing them because of his years in the House and Senate, and he had never once voted against the welfare of letter carriers. Letter carriers were blindsided when Johnson was presented with a bill to close the comparability gap by 1968 and had rejected it. Johnson offered postal and federal workers a 3.6% wage increase, or nothing at all. The 3.6% wage increase was accepted. And then in the summer of 1966, the Post Office Department issued several new cost-cutting policies and procedures, which included severe curtailment of overtime, which resulted in a huge backlog of undelivered mail. With the lack of pay increases, carriers were struggling to remain above the poverty line. Some carriers were eligible for food stamps, Medicaid, and assistance designed for the poor. Deteriorating working conditions and minimum pay lowered morale.
I wasn't against it because we only made $1.61.
Wow.
And the post office at that time was doing a lot of hiring because people would come, but then they wouldn't stay because they wasn't making enough money, and a lot of them had to do 2 jobs.
Right.
So, so the turnover was swift during that time.
I remember somebody telling me that back before 1970 that the wages were so low that you could almost file for, some kind of assistance, food stamps or something or whatever it was. I think I can't remember our exact wages, but I think it was like under $3 an hour, and a lot of people worked part-time. And then a lot of the guys, when I started working there, were World War II veterans and things. They had been there for a long time. But anyway, yeah, the money was horrible, but it was such a nice job. You just didn't make a lot of money, but.
Richard Nixon was elected president in 1969 and offered many empty promises, just as Eisenhower had. The Nixon administration announced their interest in abolishing the post office as a cabinet-level department of the executive branch and replacing it with a self-supporting postal corporation. On July 1, 1969, Nixon issued an executive order raising postal pay by 4.1%, even though inflation was running above 5%. A week later, President Rademacher testified before a House committee denouncing the pay increase and declared that postal employees had the right to strike. Rademacher went to New York for a special meeting and announced that pay legislation would pass within 6 weeks, or he would personally lead a strike himself. 6 weeks passed, and discussion between Rademacher, Nixon, Congress, and the department continued, with Nixon not willing to budge on a pay increase without the legislation of a postal corporation. In December of 1969, Nixon asked Rademacher to meet privately, and they did so on December 18th. Nixon agreed to the 5.4% pay increase effective January 1, 1970, and Rademacher endorsed the idea of an independent postal authority, which would bargain with postal unions over wages, hours, and working conditions, with binding arbitration as the last resort for issues that the parties could not resolve. On March 12th, news was released from a House committee about a Nixon-Rademacher compromise. And in New York on the same day, Branch 36's president, Gustav Johnson, delivered the report to his members and got interrupted with shouts of "not enough," "strike," "enough talk," and they demanded a strike vote. They came to an agreement to meet the next Tuesday on March 17th and hold a strike vote. On March 17th at the Manhattan Center, a vote took place until roughly 10:30 p.m., ending in 1,555 members voting yes and 1,055 members voting no. Whether or not the National Union joined the strike, Branch 36 of New York would strike against the U.S. government. Brooklyn Branch 41's president, Jack Leventhal, immediately announced that his carriers would be joining the strike as well. And the strike was on.
Today in New York City, letter carriers went out on strike for the first time in American history. They were supported by all the other postal unions, and nobody crossed their picket lines with the exception of a few supervisors.
For the first time ever, letter carriers went on strike, and mail service in and out of New York was suspended. The government immediately obtained a court order against the strike, and union leaders ordered the carriers back to work. Many refused.
The strike swept the nation like wildfire and included Branch 36 from New York, Branch 34 from Boston, Branch 157 from Philadelphia, Branch 1 from Detroit, Branch 40 from Cleveland, Branch 84 from Pittsburgh, Branch 214 from San Francisco, Branch 9 from Minneapolis, Branch 28 from St. Paul, Branch 47 from Denver, and Branch 11 from Chicago. And by March 23rd, there were over 200,000 strikers nationwide.
We're all watching the news and everything. It started in New York and started working its way across to the nation. And then when we had to make a decision, what are we going to do? Are we going to go out or not if Chicago goes out? And we decided to go out.
We were getting, listening to the radio. We're finding out the other cities were gone. Well, some have already gone out. So this gentleman, my steward, George, he was getting on the phone. He was getting on the phone calling other Cleveland stations to see, the bigger stations. And his boss was screaming at him, "Get off the phone! I'm going to fire you!" Whatever. George just kept calling. He was that kind of a guy. So anyway, he gets off the phone. He says, "Hey, Dan," he says, he named, I don't know, half a dozen stations in Cleveland that went out. And he says, "I think I'm going to take a vote whether we should walk out of here." It was about tie-out time near it. And so him and me stood up and we called everybody over, and the boss was going nuts. We were holding our own meeting. And he told them about, the big cities are out, and he named some stations within Cleveland that had walked out. And he says, "I'm going to take a vote." He says, they were sort of all lined up, we're facing them. And he says, "Everybody who wants to go on strike, come to the other side of the station on the other side of us." And every single guy did. And it was basically all guys. I don't know if we even had a girl carrier at that time. 1970? I think that's about the first time we even had a female letter carriers around there. I can't remember if we had one or not. But anyway, so we said, okay, and hey, everybody go home, change clothes, and come back. We didn't want them in uniform.
I really can't remember. I was so nervous how the vote ended up. Jim Schmidt was president, and I was vice president. And we hadn't been in office very long when this strike happened all of a sudden. So we had to have a special union meeting to discuss how we wanted to vote, if we was going to vote to stand behind Branch 36 in New York. There was a lot of discussion, some pretty good tempers flaring. I had 8 years in, and I had a pretty young family. I was arguing to myself, if I wanted to be a good union member, it was scary. They said we had a possibility of losing our jobs.
And we decided to go out. And so we're on the picket line, and my supervisor, they were in our face, and the guy saying, "We paid your health benefits, and this is a way to repay us, after we're sick," and blah, 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 And so they're taking our picture and threatening us, and "You're going to be fired, you can be arrested." And so we almost resigned ourselves, hey, maybe we will be fired. And then the high spot of it was the semi was going to come in with the mail, for our station. And we had the parking lot entrance blocked, and the semi driver wouldn't cross our picket line and turned around. It was just such a great feeling, that, wow, we got this power, this guy, that did that. So yeah, that was the highlight, because the rest of us figured we were going to probably get fired. But
we were just picketing, trying to keep the trucks coming in and out. I mean, some did turn around, some didn't. And then all of a sudden this car comes driving by, it's old Plymouth. It had 4 guys in suits in it, going up and down past us. We looked at this, well, those got to be postal inspectors, and they had cameras running, So eventually they stopped and they came over, and they says, I can't remember they must have asked us, we're letter carriers. And we all just stood there and nobody said nothing. Nobody would answer their question. They got back in their car and left.
I have just now directed the activation of the men of the various military organizations to begin in New York City the restoration of essential mail services. New York City is where the current illegal stoppages began. It is where the mail has been halted the longest, and it is where the resultant problems have become most acute. If the Postmaster General deems it necessary to act in other affected major cities, I will not hesitate to act. These replacements are being sent in as a supplemental workforce to maintain essential services. Only as many workers as are necessary to accomplish that will be used, and they will be withdrawn as the striking postal workers return to their jobs.
It was such a joke. The governor called out the National Guard. Well, can you imagine some guy from the National Guard that probably never been in a post office in his life walking into a case with a couple trays of first-class letters in front of him and telling him, yeah, put every one of these letters in one of these holes up here.
We just watched the news and we were very happy that the strike was over, and we wondered if we would still have jobs to go back to, but
Right.
I don't remember anybody getting fired. But you know, they were taking pictures of us, and boy, I wish I'd have those pictures. Whatever happened to those? That would have been great to see those pictures today. And supervisors, I don't remember them really writing us after it was over. I mean, coming up to us and still threatening us or anything. And so it was like, okay, this is settled, let's move on type thing.
Okay.
And so the atmosphere was a lot better because we wound up, winding up with collective bargaining, which we never had before, and everything else. And it changed everything, So the wages became better and the conditions and everything. So
Before the Wildcat Strike of 1970, we had collective begging, which consisted of begging members of Congress for wage increases. It also took 21 years to reach top pay as a letter carrier. And although President Keating had already signed the first national agreement before the strike, the agreement only pertained to grievance settlements and work hour rules. After the strike, letter carriers received a 14% pay increase, 6% retroactive to December 27, 1969, and another 8% whenever the Postal Reform Bill was enacted. We got the support for an establishment of an independent postal authority. We gained collective bargaining rights to negotiate our wages, hours, and working conditions with unresolved issues to be settled through final and binding arbitration, and the time to reach top pay went from 21 years to 8 years. On August 12, 1970, the Postal Reorganization Act became law, establishing the United States Postal Service as an independent government agency. Postal employees went from collective begging to collective bargaining, and the NALC now had the right to have a say in their pay, benefits, work hours, leave, job health, and safety policies.
If anybody you out there sit with somebody who went out and strike, put their job on the line, turn around and shake their hand. They deserve it. They're heroes. That's what I truly believe.